reason to expect that any more will come in between now and?
I think, yeah, I mean, we're in the middle of the open phase. So, and again, Erica will go over when that closes, due to just being thoughtful about what CBOs have on their plates and all the different things that people are managing in the pandemic. We erred on the side of giving ample time for proposers to submit their proposals. So I don't know. So I believe a lot more will come in. I'm not sure. I haven't looked in Planet Bids, to be honest, to see if we have any in yet.
Yeah, February 18th is a date that it closes. So by that date, we'll know all of the programs that have applied.
Okay, so we can go to the next one. Thank you, Kara. That was what I was like, wow. And then we can and then we can just go to the agenda. Thank you. So just an overview of what we want to go over today. And when Director Constam and Roseanne and I did agenda setting, this is what was decided. So so we'll welcome people into the space. We are being mindful to do land acknowledgements when we gather and open our circle. Then we'll go over the charter school renewal process. And Tara will give an update of where we are on that, as well as then we'll have some time for CBO or for charter school updates, both from PPS and then some space if charter schools have things they'd like to share. And then this will kind of do a similar thing with the contracted alternative schools. So an update of where we are with the CBO with the request for proposal, and then also share just some more general updates with regard to our contracted alternative schools. And then we'll close it out with a more general multiple pathways update. And there were some questions about Lippy and what we're doing. And we definitely want to celebrate the graduation rates that came out today.
Absolutely. So Karina, are you going to lead our land acknowledgement?
I think Lauren is going to.
Great.
Good evening, everybody. Could we go to the next slide? So we want to take a moment to acknowledge the stolen lands on which we meet today from our various locations around the area. This land has been home since time immemorial to the native nations of the Multnomah, Kalapuya, Chinook, Clackamas, Molalla, Cathlamet, Tualatin peoples, among others. Native peoples hunted deer and other animals, fished for salmon and other fish, gathered traditional root and berry foods, traded, lived within traditional spiritual and governmental structures, and more, and still do. Smallpox and measles epidemics brought to this area by settlers, missionaries, and traders decimated up to 90% of the population in the early 19th century. Boarding schools, tribal termination, racism, and other aspects of settler colonialism have continued to negatively impact Native people since that time. We can't undo what was done, but we can honor and acknowledge the descendants of the original peoples of this land, those who have passed, as well as the land itself. As we gather today, we focus on building connection with and learning from our current Native students, families, and community.
Thank you.
Next slide. Thank you, Kara. So just a general, I'm just going to be very quick and then I'll hand it off to Tara, but just a general overview again of our charter system, our charter school system. So we currently do not have any charter schools at the high school level. We have 4 K5s and 2 K8s, and you can see them on your screen. And then we work very closely with 2 state-sponsored charter schools. So we have the Emerson School, Kairos PDX Learning Academy, Opal, Portland Arthur, Lamond, and Lamond French Immersion and Portland Village. And then we've been really excited. There's been some real positives that we will also talk about with regard to the collaboration that has been formed, a deeper collaboration that's been formed in the last year with the 2 state-sponsored charter schools, Cottonwood School of Civics and Science and the Ivy School. And sometimes, just one note, sometimes you'll see things that talks about 1,900 charter schools students and sometimes 1,450. The 1,450 is our in-district students. And then we have the 500 and 40 include are just the 2 state-sponsored charter schools. So altogether about 2,000 students. Next slide. Okay, and then Tara, why don't I just hand it off to you at this point?
Sure. So as I think we reviewed previously, we do have 2 full renewals due this year, both Portland Arthur Academy and the Opal School. The upcoming, still remaining renewal timeline for those 2 renewals include a board committee work session, which needs to occur the week of February 1st through 5th, and the charter renewal public hearings the week of February 8th through 12th. That particular week is meeting a statutory deadline guideline, so we can't get out of that 1 week. And then we hope to have the school board committee do some charter school site visits virtually at the 2 schools sometime between the end of January and mid-February. And then there will be 1 March meeting at which the full board will vote. And then we can look at the next slide. There's a little more detail. So the key dates, we did in fact receive the full charter school applications from both schools on January 2nd as required by statute. And then those next 2 meetings, the first work session is when the board committee will receive the relevant school data. I think in the past when it's been in person, that's when you get the binder. And hopefully this time around, there's not an actual binder. There will be virtual information for you, but we'll just see what we need to do. But you will get your binder-ish of information that includes all of the school data you will want to know for the term since the last renewal for these 2 schools. And then, of course, public hearings will occur the following week after that. And then traditionally there has been, the committee has decided to do an additional meeting after that, which is not required by statute, to review any follow-up questions that might have come from the work session or the public hearings, and to discuss staff recommendation and recommend resolutions for the full board meeting in March. Next slide. The full board meeting has gone 2 different ways, but generally to meet the statutory guideline of being within 30 days after public hearing, we set the vote for the first full board meeting in March. So that can happen at that March 9th board meeting as long as public comment is offered. And if for some reason we do not vote at that meeting, the full school board does not vote, then it can be postponed to the following March meeting, as long as we've made an agreement with the charter schools to extend beyond that 30-day statutory process. Next slide. So at our last meeting, there was a question about the specific criteria for renewal. So I wanted to make sure that we included that here. It's very specific and limited and also pretty all-encompassing. So I'll quickly review. The renewal decision is based only on these 5 items, and it's based on a good faith evaluation of these 5 items. So the first is that the charter school is in compliance with charter school law and applicable state and federal law. The second is that the charter school is in compliance with its charter agreement. And the third is that it is meeting or working toward meeting the student performance goals and agreements in their charter. The fourth is that they are fiscally stable and they use a sound financial management system. And the last is that they are in compliance with any renewal criteria specified in their charter. So those are our specific and limited things that we base a renewal decision on. We get this information through our annual site visit, annual performance framework evaluation that we do, and academic, financial, and organizational records. Will all be part of the packet or binder that comes to you prior to the work session. Next slide. Any questions so far on any of the renewal process? Okay, great. So just a couple updates about our charter schools who have honestly been rocking comprehensive distance learning really amazingly well. One of the silver linings, I think, has been that as a result of comprehensive distance learning, the charter directors are meeting now. We're meeting weekly with all the directors of the different schools and the charter's office, myself and Jenny Braden, and talking about things that are coming up for the charter schools, keeping updated with the ODE guidance. And I think one of the richest parts of all of that is when directors are really talking to each other, learning about what other schools are doing, how other directors are dealing with common problems, because I think, as we've talked about before, that charter schools really do operate as independent units, and they don't have that collaboration that that a lot of district level schools do, just through leadership and different opportunities like that. So this has been an amazing opportunity for me to see the charter schools collaborate, but also for the charter schools to spend more time with peers and starting to see how other schools are doing and attacking comprehensive distance learning. I also just got a warning, my internet connection's unstable, so wave at me if I disappear. In addition, charter schools have had some amazing comprehensive distance learning successes, and I've been hearing great things about materials distributions and project schools that are sending out project kits to kids to have project work done, and Portland Village School doing meals and various other supplies distributions. And I just think that they've been able to take advantage of the fact that they have very close and tight relationships with their community and try and hold those communities together even through distance learning. I think there's been some really positive outcomes from that. Next bullet point about LIPI planning, so limited in-person instruction planning for the charter schools. I think there are questions for the charter schools that I think are very similar to the same sorts of questions and issues that the district deals with for LIPI planning. So one of the things charter schools are looking at is access to vaccines, and of course they're being included in the district's planning about how we will prioritize and ensure access to vaccines. The charter schools have pretty great flexibility in whether or not they do LIPI and how they plan that. So from school to school, there are very flexible timeframes on whether or not schools are planning to offer LIPI and whether or not they have a set time frame in which they'll be able to do it. At this time, many of the schools are still surveying their staff and community as we learn more about vaccine availability and as we learn more about the public health metrics and about risk assessment. I think schools are coming to closer decisions about it, but they again are not required to offer LIPI or not required to offer hybrid in these times. So we're just going to see what is the best way to get as many students back into school as possible safely. And I think that's where everyone is right now with that. Any questions around LIPI or any other? Okay, so I'll put an opportunity if there are any charter schools that want to give any updates or have anything to offer here.
So I don't know if you can see me raising my hand. This is Beth at Opal School.
Hi, Beth. Yes.
Hi.
Beth, I just wanted to say, before we hear from you, that we want to make this a regular feature of these board committee meetings, instead of you guys signing up for public testimony. We just want to have an opportunity to hear directly from any and all of you about whatever's on your mind. So with that, I'll finish interrupting you and let you share what you wanted to share.
Thank you, Amy. I'm always happy to play by the rules and appreciate the opportunity. So I wanted to bring into the conversation a letter that we collectively wrote, and I haven't looked at that one recently. There was an earlier one also talking about sort of the impact on charter schools of trying to operate in distance learning and expenses and the ESSER funding and all of that good stuff. And I want to start by saying that this is an area where we really want to work in partnership with PPS to try and serve all of our students. And we're all operating in really different models and with different priorities, and acknowledging that the first round of ESSER was out of our hands in a lot of ways, and we benefited at a couple of different levels, but including having technology distributed to us, which at least for my school was a really big deal. I think that probably a third of our families are participating in that, and I don't know how we would have served them in a different way. So I want to acknowledge that as one of the ways that the first round of ESSER came out to us. And then I want to just make an appeal for the next round of ESSER for you folks to be thinking about us and what it takes for us in our very small worlds to be able to spin up any kind of in-person instruction and all of the bits and pieces around the guidance. So I just like to bring that into the conversation. And now
Sorry, I
I'm
was on mute.
Oh.
Deputy Superintendent Hertz, are you still with us here?
I am.
Yes. Hi, nice to see you. Can you please explain how charter schools were considered in that first round of ESSER distribution, and why it landed that the state-sponsored charters were eligible, and that our own charters did not receive funds under that first distribution, and also if there's any refreshed thinking anticipating these next rounds?
So every time that we receive some of these federal stimulus dollars, the ODE, Oregon Department of Education, gives us guidance on who we need to distribute to and how it needs to be distributed. And I can tell you that with the first round of ESSER, that I can tell you that ODE has had different rules with different sources of funding, distinguishing state charters differently than district-sponsored charters. So, and it's not always the same. I can tell you that it changes each time. And right now we don't have the information on the new round, the ESSER 2 round. We don't have those rules yet, and so we're still getting it, waiting for that information on specifics. But in ESSER 1, we did allocate in a Title I model, and it was spent on kindergarten EAs. And so there was no qualifying charter for that. And the remainder was the ed tech, and I think she already talked about that we supported charter schools with devices, whether they were state or local. We supported all of our charter schools that needed devices for students. But right now we really don't have information on what the rules will be. And as soon as we do, then we'll have more information about how we're going to use those dollars and how we need to work with charter schools at that point.
Okay, and am I guessing correctly that with the prior guidance, they specifically said that state-sponsored charters were included and were eligible, but I'm guessing they probably didn't say that district-sponsored charters were prohibited. They just didn't call it out specifically?
So at one point, they actually called me up because, and I can't remember which round of funding, because there's been multiple and they come from different, smaller pots of funds, but there was a round where they asked us to work with them on the state charters because the way the law was written. So, and then the next time they worked with state charters directly. So it's really based on, and I can also say, that the federal government changed their rules multiple times as well. So each time, so it's not been a simple matter where it's just regular allocation that we know what to do with. I can say that we were told one set of rules and then we got to change on that and then we got to change again. So it just, it has not been an easy trade. I'm hoping with new administration at the federal level, we won't see as much fluctuation in how we're allocating those funds. And I would, Tara has also been attending ODE meetings, if that's helpful, because she attends on the charter side and I attend on the school finance side. And sometimes we don't always get the exact same presentation. So.
Yeah. Okay, and just while we have you, what about the last question about access to the actual, some of the physical supplies, PPE and cleaning supplies and such from the district?
So I'm wondering if the, so I'm wondering if we have a way to help with them. I know sometimes it's even just hard to get things, and just helping with what vendors that we're working with, so that they can, get, know what our sources are, so that as they are part of our district, that will help them get the necessary supplies that they need. So we can also, always talk with our purchasing department to get vendor lists and know, so that they know where we're getting supplies and how those contracts are working.
Tara, maybe can you, I can't direct you, but I think it might be a great idea if you could help facilitate
Sure.
that, and then report back to us about whether or not it's been made any easier for our charter family.
Sure.
Thank you, Claire.
Mm-hmm.
Beth, I wanted to comment on your bit in the letter about the pass-through rate, which we have discussed before and heard a lot of presentation and advocacy from you guys about that, I think last spring. So what I will commit to is elevating that issue in our overall budget process and bringing it to the attention of other board members, and putting it out there on our we create an ongoing list of questions and avenues that we want to go down in our budget process. So I will raise those issues and concerns there so that they get the attention that they're due.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Can I just make one more comment about Claire's thinking around PPE and other resources? One of the things that, at least for us, would be really useful would be to be able to purchase from the PPS warehouse, because I can tell you in the last 2 weeks, I've not been able to get extra large gloves for janitorial staff. I mean, I just can't find them other than exorbitant prices. And so there's just places where we don't have the economy of scale and we don't have the relationships. And so being able to, there's financial support, there's also just organizational support that I know that PPS has stronger purchasing power and is able to negotiate things that we just can't do. And it'd be really lovely to be able to piggyback on some of that.
Thank you.
Thanks. We appreciate that we get an opportunity to talk to you about these things.
Of course. It's great that you guys are feeling so cohesive these days.
But that's a stretch. I mean, everybody is like, I said to somebody earlier today, we are flying too close to the treetops. It's just all a little nerve wracking. But yeah, I think all of us are having really positive feedback from our families. So, you know, yeah, we're close to the treetops, but we're flying, and things are going about as well as they can. At least what I'm hearing from our families and from other directors.
All right, Karina, I'm going to send it back to you. Our agenda that we have that you showed at the top of the meeting is a little bit different than our agenda that we have in board books. So I'm going to let you run with it.
Oh, okay. I think, all right. I think they are similar, but we will go on to the next thing, which is in both, which is the CBO update.
Yes, and Karina, I don't know if you wanted to give a little overview for just alternative schools in general, or I'm happy to do so. I think it's just essentially a listing of the alternative schools and kind of making the distinction between contracted alternative schools and in-district schools, which is listed on the slide you have up now.
It's just really for reference. And I do think, I don't know if that's what you were referencing, Amy, Director Constam, but I do think it is kind of what we had spoken about, which was just looking at charter school renewal and charter school updates and CBO RFP and CBO updates, and then LIPI. So right now it's on just the CBO, the RFP update. So we have Erica manages most directly our 10 partnerships and with our contracted alternative schools. And then we have Metropolitan Learning Center, K-12, as well as Alliance High School as our in-district alternative schools. And together that makes up our alternative system. So next slide.
Thanks, Karina.
Yep.
So as many of you already know, every 5 years, PPS conducts an RFP process, and this is where we open up the solicitation for community-based organizations that wish to provide alternative school services to PPS students. We are currently in the midst of the RFP process. We released the RFP on January 8th. And currently programs who are interested are up on Planet Bids and reviewing the materials, and many of them submitting questions and working on their proposals. They are due on February 18th, at which time our internal team will look through the different proposals and potentially set up interviews with programs that have applied that we have additional questions for. And our notice to intent award is on April 16th. And so we were trying to be generous with the amount of time we gave proposers to draft their proposals, but also being cognizant of the fact that we do have programming that starts July 1st, so that the timeline between April 16th and July 1st is somewhat tight for programs that are either starting new partnerships with PPS or those who are continuing and need to draft contracts for the following year, starting in the summer. Next slide, please. So while many of the elements of the RFP are very similar to years previously, always with a look at students for whom our traditional setting might not have been able to meet their needs. And so we always have a disproportionate number of students who have chronic attendance issues and face credit deficiency issues and other learning gaps. And then, of course, looking at specific groups of students who might need extra supports and services, or those who we as a district are targeting to get extra supports. And so we take a look at all those different areas in addition to the different areas around the city where we're feeling like alternative needs need to be met. And we draft our RFP. And so here are a few different bullets of things that we've looked at this year. And of course, it's specified in more detail in the RFP. Next slide, please. Are there any questions about the RFP process or questions regarding that before we go on to other CBO updates? Okay, I won't beg you to ask me any questions. I'll just continue. So CDL has been a really interesting experience across our CBO network. We have seen some miraculous work happening across our schools. Similarly to the charter system, CBO leaders have been meeting way more regularly. I think the allowance of doing virtual meetings and not having to park in the BESC parking lot has really made it much easier to connect. I don't know why we weren't doing that previously. We seem to have always had the capability, but this has kind of thrust us into that environment. So we've been really excited to meet more regularly and, like charters, kind of share common practices, common challenges, and common aspirations. And so that's been really rewarding. Each of our CBO programs are unique and serve a kind of unique set of students. And so each program does have its own set of services and supports and has been addressing the needs of students in different ways. But I'd say one of the things that brings us all together is just the perseverance in terms of really working with students and families to stabilize them as much as possible in these very tumultuous times. So CBOs have been coming up with very creative ways, in addition to visiting homes and dropping off work, also making sure that they're using their vast array of wraparound services and partnerships to target those student needs and family needs. We've had a lot of engagement from our CBO students, which, as you can imagine, the population of students served by these programs, engagement is always something that's considered, what's the word? Something that needs to be addressed, because these are students for whom engagement, they're kind of hanging on and hoping to achieve that goal of graduation, even though they might be behind their peers. In terms of LIPI updates, we do have a few different programs, 9 different CBOs that we currently contract with, one of whom has been pretty much running throughout the pandemic, and they're residential treatment. And so they've actually been continuing to do in-person in a full-scale model, even though it's very few students. Then we have one of our CBO programs, Helen's View, that is currently doing LIPI and has done LIPI previously and then stopped LIPI once incidences were kind of raised to a different alert level and have just restarted this past Wednesday. The rest of our CBO programs are planning for what that might look like, but of course are planning with the utmost precaution, just as our in-district schools are, and are very eager to learn about the immunization plan and how they're going to be integrated into those services. And then additionally, many of them have heightened concern for obvious reasons because of the rash of violence that's happening in the city. Many of our CBOs have experienced a lot of hardship in terms of working with students and families that are impacted by violence, either directly or in the community. Many of our CBOs have had several students who have been shot and killed and or involved in extreme violent activities. And of course, this is kind of shaking the core of the communities that they serve. And so many of our CBOs, while most intended to provide alternative school services, of course, have to keep these things in mind and are working with their communities to think about the ways in which to open most safely, not only as it relates to the pandemic and spread of virus, but also in terms of violence prevention. And I'm not sure if anybody else, as we move through the agenda, would like to kind of speak on that point. So those are some of the things regarding LIPI. We don't have many other programs that are super eager to go back right away because of a lot of the violence in the community, and of course with the small amount of resources that they have to actually open facilities. But all of them are, of course, taking all of those things into consideration while planning.
Erica, excuse me, may I ask a question? This is Director
Absolutely.
DePass.
Hi.
Do the CBOs have any resources available to them that the district provides, such as, we've got a department that works specifically with, social emotional learning and suicide prevention, for instance. We just got a presentation a few days ago on that. Are there supports at the district level available to your CBOs, to our CBOs?
Absolutely. All of the services that we provide to our PPS students are eligible for our PPS students enrolled in our CBO programs. we have been working really strategically to try and partner with a lot of departments internally that where there might not have been as much of a link in years past. And so we do work with, you know, a lot of our different departments related to social emotional learning, the threat assessments, looking at different violence prevention techniques. But then we also like to rely on our CBOs, who we really look to as experts in this field, and unfortunately have pretty detailed crisis management plans and resources and experience in this work. And so while we want to, of course, ensure that we're utilizing all our resources to share the best practices that we see fit, we also welcome and allow them and want them to share what they know works within the communities that they work with. So it's kind of, I would say, a reciprocal relationship, and we're hoping to develop that in a more seamless way, obviously, as we move towards bringing kids back.
Yeah, I guess, thank you for that. I was also wondering, so the CBOs are experts in their communities, the communities that they're serving, and the district has these, you know, supports available. Do you know, to the extent that the district supports are being used and are adequate for what is needed? Or are CBOs coming to the district asking for additional help and taking advantage of those supports, or are they puzzling through this on their own? Or is there a combination of both? Like how
Karina, I'm not sure if you want to touch on this. I was going to say it is a combination of both, but I see you kind of, you know, anxious to speak. And
Sure. Thank you.
Go ahead, Eric. Go ahead, Erica. I'll go after you.
No, I was just going to say that I think it is a little bit of both. You know, we do have, and of course we have 9 different programs, each of which have their own range of services. So for instance, you know, POIC has several different campuses and several different administrators across different neighborhoods. Helen's View is part of MESD. PCC is its own whole network. So I think each of the CBOs, and, you know, Mount Scott serves a different community with its own, you know, wraparound supports and services and partnerships. And so we always offer support, and we're always open to hearing what supports are needed and trying to advocate on their behalf if desired. And then other times we realize that it's more seamless for them to partner with their own agencies that they partner with to provide those services for their staff and communities.
I'd love to
Karina, is
hear
there something
directly
you
from someone, one of our CBOs or any of you about, you know, first, I just want to extend my personal compassion and condolences for the losses and the heartache in your school communities, and would like to hear from people about what's working in terms of what you're able to do for your students and families and what's still needed.
This is Dawn Cornelia Jackson. I'm the principal at Helen's View, which is run through Multnomah Educational Service District, and I'm the principal up at Donald E. Long Detention Facility, which isn't a CBO, but serves a lot of PPS students. Thank you, Erica, for kind of summarizing. I know we are all dealing with very different things. We've lost 8 kids in 2 months, and not all have been PPS students. It has been really traumatizing. Part of the reason that we chose to do limited in-person instruction, and it's all outside CTE based classes, was because our kids need us, and weighing dangers, right? We worked with Multnomah County Health in reopening, so we weren't, you know, ignoring COVID, but we feel like we're losing kids without connection. We also have accessed, we had our mental health therapist and school counselor work over the entire break, and paid them and worked on comp time so that they could continue to support families who are in dire need. I do have to say that Title X services have been incredible from PPS, because our houseless issue during this pandemic has just shot up. And I think, you know, there's always a need for more, but I feel like we've done a really great job at connecting with our students, but it's been at the expense of our staff's mental health often, because it's just such a huge, huge need with that much loss, and especially in the middle of a pandemic.
Please extend our gratitude to your staff for everything they do.
Yeah, so I could chime in just a quick sec. Joe McFerrin with POIC. Yeah, it's been real rough. We've lost several, and as an agency, one of the things that we do that some of you may not be aware of is that we have a division, if you will, of 20 staff members, 20 plus staff members that work with specifically African American youth and families involved with the criminal justice system. And so our reach with respect to wraparound services goes far beyond POIC and Rosemary Anderson High School as an organization. It also filters into the schools throughout Portland Public. We are, one of the things that I can highlight that we're excited about is that our mental health, we have 3 school-based, getting ready to add a fourth mental health therapist. And our therapists are participating in training with PPS. So that's my latest. I mean, PPS has been very supportive throughout my years here, 26 years, in various ways. But the latest area that I was excited about was that our mental health folks who are working overtime, as you could imagine, dealing with not only the community violence, but also COVID. And so one of the things that I hope that will happen in the not too distant future is that PPS and POIC and others throughout the community and our public safety officials can get together and create a plan, a safety plan for the entire community. What you're seeing in the news and what's being reported doesn't capture all the violence that's actually occurring. So I've never seen, I've been around for 26 years and been through a lot with respect to gun violence, but I've never seen anything like this. And so the kids who left school before the pandemic, who were, we all thought seemed like a pretty good kid and was on the right track. What we're finding is some of those kids are in situations now where they have to survive, they have to join and become a part of that lifestyle. So I think we all need to come together and figure out with our public safety systems to ensure that when we do reopen, that we put our best foot forward and mitigate any sort of violence that's brewing. But all in all, we're just going to keep a good attitude, do the best we can, continue to work together. But I just will say that when we've called on the district has been there to help us in any way that they can.
Thanks, Joe. I'm glad to hear that. That last piece, I'm glad to hear. Thank you.
I still have a question. My question was more about, is the demand for services that the district can provide, is the district able to meet that demand, or is there a disconnect between what is needed? And if there wasn't enough, and if we could resource the demand, and I didn't get a sense for that. If the CBO's demand for services to address the violence that's happened, maybe the social emotional supports are being met, And if not, was there a way to resource that demand? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say if you're asking, one of the things, I just speak for us, and I'm hoping that this is a safe space so that this information kind of somewhat stays here, but we are seriously considering looking at hiring school resource officers. We need, it's that bad. I'm not necessarily all for having officers in school. That's not my first choice, but the things that are going on the streets are just, it's too much. It's too much. So I guess if your question is, I guess that would be my ask, is that we need a presence. Because although we have 11 gang outreach workers, we're just not getting the street level intel like we normally get when we're face to face. Our lines of communication have been fractured. And so that for me, and our staff is creating a lot of concern. So that would be my ask. That's our number one issue with reopening. I feel good that we can work through the challenges of COVID. I actually feel good about that. We've done a lot of things to address and to plan for, but in terms of the violence, we're not ready. And I don't know, I'm not so sure that any of the schools are really ready to open up and just open up the schools, given what's been going on the street.
Joe, can I try to?
That's what I was looking for. And I appreciate your forthrightness about what your needs are. I know this is kind of an awkward situation, but that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Joe, can I try to put a fine point on that? Are you talking about being particularly concerned about having kids back in the building for whether it's Lippy or whatever form of in-person instruction, because then they can be targeted because their location is known?
No question. And I will say this, to be frank, I'm more worried about the public schools than I'm worried about Rosemary Anderson High School.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, Joe. Thanks for answering it ahead of time. Is you're suggesting that Roosevelt, Jeff, other schools need to be on high alert when we do get kids back in?
Yeah, we have an opportunity. We have a real opportunity to be proactive in getting at this now. Because we're going to need everybody, in my opinion, we're going to need all systems and the community on board.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have to say, from I'm sure many of us feel this way from a Helen's View perspective, we need more folks who can do social work as well. Like, we are just stretched to the max in terms of trying to connect students with services across the board, food. We have 4 kids who have been shot who are not dead, and they need PTSD. They need in-home health care. And we just don't have enough staff to provide the amount of support that we have at the moment.
Thank you. This is exactly the conversation I was hoping that we'd have, like some truth telling. I was really literally trying to find out if the demand for what is needed out in the community, because I don't know, this is the first I've heard about it. if the district is able to meet some of that demand, or do we need to do, like, do we need a plan B? Especially like these other high schools that are impacted. So I appreciate your being, you know, your forthrightness about this. That was exactly what I was trying to get at.
Michelle, my impression is that our counseling and social work staff are in something of the same boat. Their caseloads are up and they're stretched. But that's again my impression, and we might want to hear. And I think we actually have a session coming up where we might be able to get that information about sort of current state.
So can I just share some, so my response to your question, Director DePass, and thank you for asking it. Thank all of you directors for your authenticity in this conversation. I appreciate that we can have this much needed, overdue conversation. So the data that we have, like, it's powerful for me to hear Mr. McFerrin say he's never experienced things like this. That is powerful to me. Because that is the experience that we are hearing, not just from Mr. McFerrin, but from many people around the city, that when we look at the data, that we are back to the early 90s, when we had when we've had the worst gun violence of that's when I first moved to Portland. So this is worse than it's been since then. And that was told to us from Nike Green's Office of Violence Prevention in the mayor's office. So I think in answer to your initial question, I think there's always more we can do, because anytime we have this many kids in harm's way, like the adults aren't, in my opinion, the adults aren't doing enough if kids don't get to be kids. When kids are having to think so much in a different brain, in such survival mode, then the adults have work to do. And as far as, and I don't believe it's just necessarily Portland Public Schools or the education systems. I think that's when we're having conversations with the Office of Violence Prevention. Erica, Jeffrey McGee, other people go to the Peace Collaborative twice a month to really try to get and stay looped into what is happening in the community. How can we put an ear? How can we stay connected and as more interconnected? But I would just say, and I think Dawn just talked about it perfectly, is we have so many students that we are losing, but there's a variety of things around how do we get upstream? So what do we do? Like, there's one is, how do we care for people who are injured and wounded, which is absolutely necessary and vital. There's also just a more broader conversation around how do we start to get upstream, and how are we starting to help students who feel themselves or their world shifting like this. And so when we think, just in conversations that I've had, or myself and Lorna have, and Erica have had, other people have had, with James Loveland and Amy Rona in Student Services, who have been lovely trying to meet this moment. One of the things that we've done right in Portland Public Schools is we've gotten a threat assessment, somebody who just deals with threat assessment. And so that's been helpful. We have a threat assessment team. But I think that when I just have had this conversation, two things. One is, we have in student success and health, mental health, culturally specific mental health services. And so there's been conversations around, are those getting as much as they need to get into the CBOs, and or what would that look like? And so it's not that, I appreciate Mr. McFerrin saying that we enjoy and realize and cherish our relationships with our contracted alternative schools, that they feel like we have a good relationship and that we're working on this together. And I do feel like, what is it from a student success and health with regard to mental health services that we need to craft? Because these are PPS students. And so what is that? And then I think the social workers, when we talk about social workers, we have done some really wonderful things with social workers, and our social workers are getting spread really thin with this. The other thing that I would just add is that I think about our staffs. I think about the leaders that you just heard from. I think about what it takes to be a leader and corral your staff during trauma again and again and again. And I worry about, Erica and I talk about this often, is we worry about the staff teams out there. Like, how are they getting replenished and nourished, and what kind of healing practices are we helping them with? So I think there's things that we can do and continue to do from a social work standpoint. I also think there's things that we can continue to do from professional development standpoint. It's like, who are we bringing in? How are we replenishing? How are we helping? And in district staff as well, because we have lots of those conversations about how are we keeping students safe, and how would we reopen, and under what conditions would we reopen, and just being really clear that when we ask people around LIPI or around things, as the superintendent has made very clear, it is completely voluntary. So that that we have to be really clear about when families say no thank you. There might be lots of reasons why they're saying no thank you, for the safety of their students. But I also think about additional social workers or additional mental health supports. What are the trainings we can do around social emotional wellness for the staff? What are we doing for families? There's a lot of families that are impacted. Like, what kind of services are we doing? And then the last thing I'll say is from our reconnection services, which I was going to talk about a little bit later, but from reconnection services, we work really vitally, and that team is an amazing team. And those are really the thoughts around also for them with regard to as we put kids into, as we find the next best fit for students, which is the job of the reconnection services team. It's a lot, it's very complex, because there's a lot more violence, as Mr. McFerrin said, than is in the news. And so it's really trying to see about what level of risk and what level of understanding do we have with families, or what we have with students. If we're recommending any particular school, who else goes there? What's the history of violence with the current student body, or threats of violence, or fear of intimidation of violence with somebody that we might be seeking to place? So there's lots of layers to it, and it's really complex, but I think that we need to continue to think about how do we show up differently and better and more intensely, because this moment is incredibly intense. So thank you for asking the question.
Thank you.
So I would just say, Amy, how do you react, or board members or anyone, how do you react to a community-wide safety plan?
How do we react? I mean, part of one of the things that Karina and I had a conversation with when we were thinking about this meeting, and I wanted to address this issue of community violence in our meeting today, is what are we as a school district doing to coordinate with citywide efforts here? And I think it's great that, some of our people attend the police collaborative. And I think, Karina, you mentioned a couple of other things that we're engaging with more broadly, that with the purpose of trying to protect and serve our students. So I think that that's important, partly because we have a responsibility to elevate to other leaders how serious the issue is right now, and then to problem solve with other leaders and those who have access to other resources and different kinds of resources than we have. So I don't know if that, I don't know if the Scott and Michelle, if you have anything else you want to add to that, but that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind, Joe, when you ask that question. If I miss the mark, let me know.
No, I think that's right. I think that it's our kind of moral responsibility to elevate the concerns. I'm on Nextdoor sometimes, unfortunately, and so there's lots of reports of violence. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about how it impacts the kids in our system, and then the community at large. And so, yeah, I feel obligated to elevate these concerns. Do we have somebody that attends the interfaith meeting that's every other week, every other Friday at the Northeast Portland precinct? Do we have someone from the district, or is that a gap that could be?
That's what is, are you referring to the police collaborative?
It's, yeah, I call it IPAC. I think it's the Interfaith Police Accountability Committee. It's a group of people from law enforcement, the district attorney's office, and families that have been impacted by gang violence.
I think Dana Reamer attends that in our student support services department. I do believe we have staff who attend that. I believe it's Dana Reamer. We can check on who that is. Erica, do you know, or Lorna, do you know off the top of your head, or anybody?
I don't, but it's something I can look into for sure.
Yeah, it might be nice to have someone that's at least, getting on those emails, knowing about when the meetings happen. And
Totally.
it's a great place to hear about what's happening and also be able to advocate. I think that'd be a really great, just to make sure there is one person or people assigned to those meetings.
If I was going to put the link to it in the chat, but I don't know there's a chat to put a link in. But yeah, the next one is tomorrow. I just Googled the Portland Peace collaboration, and it's on the city. It's on the city website.
We have several.
We have many attendees at that meeting, but the other meeting I have not heard of. So I'll look up that meeting now.
So I think when the SRO program ended, it left a vacuum, and we haven't found, I think, the sweet spot where we have. I mean, we had a group of officers who were really good at working with students and keeping them out of the justice system. That was their passion, and now there's nobody who's, if we need to, school isn't in session now, but if it was and we needed to call an officer, we'd get whoever showed up, and they wouldn't have the dedicated time that the SROs had. So, working with the city on that has not been very smooth. And I don't want to throw a rock at the city. That's not my purpose here, but we haven't figured out that relationship going forward. And again, our chief of police, when he was first hired, said, I think he has a background in SROs, and was like, wow, do we really want to get rid of that unit? But politics. So I think, you talk about what's a community plan. I don't think we have one, and that's troubling. And maybe that's what we're seeing, and maybe that's part of why we're seeing a resurgence in violence, along with, when people lose their jobs, and the COVID creates huge stresses. Of course, racism, it all impacts regular folks.
Yeah, and it's this level of gun violence is not unique to Portland. It's happening nationwide. So yes, it's all of those things. At the same time, the police reform is happening at the same time. That wasn't planned. But yeah, we have so many big systemic issues to handle right now. That would be another one that would be important to get.
Yeah, I'd like to offer up, if anyone's interested, to sit in on our team's weekly conversation about what's going on in the streets. And I think that might really, that could be eye-opening to hear about what's really going on. And I would I'd even tie it to to education in that we've had a couple of issues where we've had class and we had the wrong groups. They used to, we had groups that were, at one point were fine together, and then all of a sudden they're not fine on Zoom, trying to, in class. And so, I mean, there's just layers and layers of how the community of violence is impacting in learning and instruction. But I would just offer that up. Is anyone interested? My team would love to just kind of give you a rundown of what they're seeing, what's going on, and their concerns.
I would be honored to attend your team meeting if I would get an invite. I would like to know more about what's happening, and also just be able to think through, maybe there needs to be a task force just within Portland Public if it's not happening at the city level on terms of what are we going to do to take care of the kids, in the absence of, police presence, which I'm not a fan of either. But I'm changing my mind a little bit as I'm hearing more from you, particular. I'd like to learn more and like to think about what we do to address. That's a very different conversation from some of the charter schools that are on the call.
Jill, that would be great if you could follow up with email and let us know when we can do that. That'd be great. I think it's really important.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Same here.
Well, and I on a positive note, I will say we are continuing, and as we spoke about a little bit earlier, is working as a secondary system. So Kristen Westfall, who supervises the area senior director for middle schools, and Carl Logan and myself and Elisa Shore, who supervises the comprehensive high schools, and Lorna and Erica and I have worked with Jeffrey and pulled together some principles to begin to have this conversation. And so we just had a meeting, was that last night, Erica? And so just thinking, and that was part of what is coming up, is so we're having these conversations with regard to the CBO. Erica's having them with the CBO team of leaders, and we're having them in different pieces. And so that's part of what's happening is it's growing around how are we pulling people together. And the second piece of positive that I would say is James Loveland and Amy Rona and myself and Jeffrey McGee met with the Office of Violence Prevention in December. And so really have talked about how do we strengthen that referral process and what are the services that are available from the city. And so I do think, because there's a lot that we can do in education, and I do think that it's far bigger than education. And so it's also, what are the resources that we can all pull together? So it's a both and. And other people and other systems are having similar conversations. So that, I mean, that I feel like that's positive as we try to synergize around this and move towards action.
I think you're right. It's good. The conversations are taking place. All right, Joe, we'll look forward to your follow-up on that. And then Karina, we had, I think, one more item that we wanted to get to talk about our credit recovery efforts.
Yeah, and we can be, and I just want to do a shout out to for our grad rate, which we did not have kind of planned, and then it was like, well, it's today. It went out today. So Kara, can we go to the next slide, please? And then the next slide. So you may have read in the paper that Portland Public Schools graduation rates were released today, and that our 4-year graduation rate rose to 83.7%. Which, and I just want to also say that the rates that went out today are the 4-year rates, or that are most in the paper today are the 4-year rates. And we know, as an alternative system and in public education, that we are charged to serve students until they're 21. So we are even more excited that Alliance had a 25.8% gain last year. So they went from 35% four-year graduation rate to this year to a 61% graduation rate, which is huge.
That's phenomenal.
And Lorna's on the call, our principal of Alliance.
Way to go,
Previous
principal.
principal of Alliance.
Fast Buffalo Horse and all your fabulous students.
And MLC had a 23% one-year graduation gain. They went from 57 to 80%. And I want to talk about, I'll talk about that, share about that. But overall, back to our contracted alternative schools, we don't have any charter schools at the high school level, but our PPS graduation rate rose. And one of the things that we know that that is in part, and to some degree, very significant part of that is our contracted alternative schools. So this is where I love that we are a system, that we're a district-wide secondary system. And so it's very good work that's happening at the comprehensive schools. There's great things that our comprehensive leaders and our comprehensive teachers are doing. And when our students move into alt ed placements and move to our contracted alternative schools, when they go to Rosemary Anderson or to Helens View or to Mount Scott or to Portland Community College and they graduate or complete, the data goes back to the comprehensive school because they don't have a state report card. And so I just want to celebrate our CBOs. We served 944 students last year, Erica?
Yep, that's the number.
There were 944 students, and some of those students will not be in the four-year rate. In fact, probably many of them won't, but some of them are in that four-year rate. So it does, every year we'll go through, one of the tasks we have now with regard to data is that we'll go through and we'll say how many of the students graduated from the CBO data in our CBO report cards, our alternative accountability report cards. What is that percentage? Often it's 2 or 3%. Sometimes it's been as high as 6 or 8 when you get to the 5-year completion rate, that the CBOs that are contracted alternative schools have positively impacted the district's overall rate. So I just want to shout out to our contracted alternative schools as well, and just to create a deeper understanding with regard to our entire alternative system, that it's one of the ways that we actually really work together and we complement each other, students and families in general education and alternative education, that we're one secondary system, that we're all working together. And so I just really want to appreciate all the school leaders, all the secondary school leaders on the call. So again, thank you to Helens View and Rosemary Anderson and Mount Scott and PCC and NAIA and all the schools that are not physically here today, but are part of our PCC, or that are part of our CBO community. Like, they are all to be celebrated also in our graduation rates. So I just wanted to take a minute to do a shout out and a shout out to Alliance and MLC as well.
It's really important.
And one of the things that we're working with is, one of the pieces of work that we have in multiple pathways is working on our alternative accountability report card. So we had another meeting, I think again, just yesterday, with our system planning and performance and around doing that work over the next few months. So that's one of the metrics that we use as we evaluate our contracted alternative schools, that we will do this year like we've done in past years, although the data will be different, of course, because the assessments look different in the pandemic. But that work continues. I also just want to say, one of the things with very specifically is, particularly with MLC, but I think it's important to say with regard to MLC as well as with Alliance, is we have made very direct connections with great intention between the Reconnection Services team and our in-district alternatives as well. So if you go back, just as an example, if you go back to MLC's data and you look at it, about 5 years ago, there was a significant drop. And the reason there was a significant drop is we as a district with intention said we wanted to open more doors for students in alternative schools, that there should be more options for them. And then I'm proud because every year since over the last 4 years, their rates are ticking up. And so they're doing the good work, and they have a stronger relationship with our Reconnection Services team. So, so lots of really great work and lots of really wonderful staff working really hard across the city throughout our alternative system. So I just wanted to give that shout out.
Thank you. It's great. And I'll pull that out in our report to the full board as well. Do you want to close things out by just talking a little bit? At our next meeting, we're going to look at our data from our CBOs and alternative schools around course completion and what's been going on in CDL. But you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It's the very last thing. So can we have next slide, please? Just really quickly, and I'll bring Lorna in here also to talk about anything with regard to our LIPI work. But I just also want to share with regard to some of the things that we are doing with regard to outreach to families. So there was a big push before winter break with regard to emergency supports to families. So over $20,000 in utility bills and different kinds of bills to help families. We worked with the fund and they provided the funding for that. And then our social workers got those funds out to families. So that was a really positive thing that happened in December before winter break since last time we met. And then with regard to our LIPI program, there's really just a range, just like, and I feel like we already had largely the LIPI conversation in some respects around just the various considerations that schools have and the considerations they're tending to as they make LIPI plans. But there's a range. But right now we have, Dawn had talked about at Helensview, providing LIPI services, other schools saying with intention they're choosing not to provide LIPI services at this time. We're starting with regard to multiple pathways with Alliance at Benson. And what was prioritized actually by the students and the staff was the BSU. So they really want to talk about the Black Student Union. Those are the students who we've heard the most strongly from around wanting that service and that staff wanting to provide that service. So we're starting that planning process, as well as some other processes around social workers. So social workers providing some time where students can come in or have some LIPI time to get some of the, get some supplies, there's a coat distribution, get kind of really just do some kind of mental health check-ins or just some check and connects with students. And then we're really looking at just what will that look like kind of as we go forward, because we're going to have different phases of LIPI as the weeks progress. And then the last thing is with regard to DART. So we have 2 residential treatment facilities, and then we have 4 day treatment facilities. And we're in the early planning stages right now to begin at the residential treatment facilities. And then I'm not sure, Lorna, do you want to share anything about the programs?
Just that the programs that I supervise, so Teen Parent Services, Portland Evening and Summer Scholars, Reconnection Services, and the PrEP grant are all continuing to provide services between CDL and developing plans for LIPI. Teen Parent Services continues to be very active, getting donations for students, diapers, clothes, other things, and delivering those to students, as well as providing academic and social emotional support. Reconnection Services is working with the whole system of in-district and CBO schools to really re-engage students who've been out of school. And they also are developing a LIPI plan because they feel like their students need some face-to-face time, 6 feet apart, with the case managers in Reconnection Services. And then Portland Evening Scholars will not do LIPI because that would be an additional cohort for students. So they are continuing for second semester this year they will continue to provide credit recovery through CDL. And then the PrEP grant, we can talk about it another time, but it's just another resource that that really helped with that graduation rate, I would say, for Alliance and MLC. And the prep grant started working this year with a couple campuses at Rosemary Anderson High School also. So those are the programs that I work with.
Thanks, Lorna.
That's kind of where we are. And then with regard to the incompletes and credit recovery, we can go into a deeper dive in the future, but every campus has a list of incompletes, and we're working with all the administrative teams and the school teams with regard to what are the individual student plans. So that work continues, and we hope to get some really good information at the end of semester, but we won't have that data for a couple weeks.
Coming right up.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah, if I could add just one thing, and I apologize for this being at the end of the meeting, but first of all, I wanted to thank the PBS board and Karina and Erica all for including the CBOs in these meetings. This has been really beneficial, and we really feel more included. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you for starting this last year. I know that for us and for most of the CBO at Mount Scott and for their CBOs, one of the big questions, and it was brought up by Cara, is the access to the vaccine and how CBO staff and charter school staff are being factored into that distribution plan for the district. Is there any update that we can provide to our staff on that?
I'd be happy to kind of share where we're at. So, district personnel right now at a pretty high level, I'm assuming are the people responsible for kind of developing that plan. And just today at leadership, we received a little bit more information about who will be phased in and when. That being said, there have been no specifics being shared. I have generated numbers, and I've given numbers to the senior manager responsible for organizing those efforts. And we have included the CBO staff in those numbers. So while it's not necessarily shared at what point of the phase in that will be, they are being considered and included in that phase-in plan. And so as soon as we know more, of course, I'll share. As soon as I find out, I will definitely share with our CBO partners. But you can definitely rest assured that the numbers that your staff will be included in that plan. I think it's contingent on a variety of different factors. And I don't want to speak with any level of expertise since I'm not involved in those decisions, but definitely we'll be sharing out once we learn more.
And the same is true for the charter school staff.
So one other thing too is I know with the ESSER funding and the GEAR funding, that's a topic that the CBOs are curious about, how the CBOs will be factored into that additional funding that comes through and when. We just, again, want to continue to lobby for the CBOs being included in any additional funding that comes in to support students, particularly our underserved students.
Absolutely, Tom. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. And as you know, these bills have just recently been passed. And so as we learn about the ways in which the district will be receiving funds and the rules associated with them, we'll be reaching out to our partners to determine how and when or if they'll be included. I've been excited about the various different funds that have come into the district and the ways in which they've been kind of the considerations we've had as a district to pass those on. There's always more we can do. And so with every new funding stream that comes in, we continue to advocate to ensure that all of our PBS students have access to that.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Appreciate your time. Next time we gather, we'll be reviewing our charter renewals. Really appreciate your candor too in helping us understand just really what your students are experiencing, what some of your students are experiencing right now, and also the incredible efforts that your staff makes to connect with your students every day and their families. Hard in these challenging times. Appreciate all of you. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next month. Anything else, Karina?
No, I just thank you. Thanks to everyone who attended, and thank you to our charter schools and alternative programs committee members. We appreciate you.
Okay, take care, everybody.